I read the opening words of a poem by Nompilo from KwaZulu-Natal, from the South African Survivor Network. We were silent because we were afraid we would be judged. We were silent because we have gone to our pastors and they have judged us. We were silent because of the stigma that stays with us wherever we go. We were silent because if we speak, we have nowhere to go. We are not being silent any longer. We light this candle in our commitment to break the silence. We ask you, Holy Spirit, open the scriptures to us. Give us courage to listen and to speak and to act. Amen. Presiding Bishop, colleagues, and all who are sharing in this service today, I greet you in the gracious name of Jesus Christ. I introduce the first theme from our preaching series, From Freedom to Fear, saying no to the powers that be. Our key reading comes from the Old Testament, the book of Esther, chapter 1, from verse 1 to 22. There is a secondary reading from 2 Timothy, chapter 2, from verse 6 to 11, which I would encourage you to read for yourself. I will read selected verses from Esther, chapter 1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the east, from the least to the greatest, who in the citadel of Susa. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served with him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the king's attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burnt with anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times, and those who were closest to the king: Karshana, Sethat, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Mosina, and Mamukan, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the people of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, Let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Mercia and Pedia. Let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. And let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The kings and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his household, using his native tongue. This is the word of the Lord. The Pakistani activist Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, sometimes known as the Pakistan Gandhi, once said, "If you want to know how civilized a culture is, look at how it treats its woman." The truth is, we are failing our women as a nation and as a church. Across the African continent, sexual violence against women is being used as a weapon of war. We are the victims and survivors of human trafficking, rape, varied forms of abuse, murder, and many other unspeakable acts of violence. This abuse, violence, and death is often at the hands of people we know and love, their words carving deep wounds into our souls, and their embrace often deadly. Simple everyday activities such as walking to school, going to the corner shop, picking up a parcel from a local post office, jogging in a park, or even needing to relieve oneself in the middle of the night in the flimsy outside toilets in our townships and informal settlements, pose life-threatening experiences for girls and women alike. Headlines abound with the names and faces of women who on a daily basis are raped, beaten, or killed in the most atrocious ways by men, some of whom are prominent politicians, sports personalities, community members, and even church pastors. A colleague of mine from another denomination recently shared how the body of an active church mother was found in the bushes in Natal somewhere, reportedly after she had committed suicide on account of the domestic violence which she was experiencing in the church manse. Though shocking, I must confess that for us as women, these reports come as no surprise, but merely confirm what we have known all along. Women are vulnerable to violence at every stage of our lives, from womb to the grave. And by and large, our lives are treated as cheap and expendable. What is most despicable to us, however, is that the scenario is defended in the name of culture, tradition, business, and worst of all, religion. Often upheld through the powerful hierarchical and patriarchal value systems that permeate every sector of life, including that of the church. As a Methodist church, we have recognized the need to tackle this head-on in lament, confession, and action. Our presiding bishop last week launched our 7-week preaching program, which forms one aspect of the scourge of addressing the scourge of gender-based violence, which is ever present both in the wider society and the church itself. From the story found in John 8, from verse 1 to 11, Bishop Malinga reminded us that Jesus challenges the prevailing norm and calls for a new way of mercy, grace, and healing, not only for the woman in the story, but also for those who were using the Mosaic law, believing they were justified in their actions and their judgment. We engage in this campaign because we know Christ comes to offer us life in all its abundance, to restore the dignity of every human being, a dignity given to us from the beginning of creation when God breathed God's life-giving spirit into all humanity, both male and female. As a woman and as a theologian, I've come to understand that we are powerfully shaped by our reading of Scripture, which too often has been used to support or justify the dominant patriarchal world in which the Bible was written and which we still find ourselves. It often is used to lean towards the thinking that somehow women have a lesser God image than men. I know, however, that this is not the truth. That deeply embedded in the heart and will of God is a different way of life that celebrates and values all of humanity. It is worth noting that the dominant voice of patriarchy is revealed throughout the Scriptures, from the very first account of creation to the triumphant vision in Revelation of women and men equally gathered in the presence of God. One of the most profound examples of this is to be found in the book of Esther and in the story which we read a few moments ago. Esther is only one of two biblical books that carry the name of a woman, and it must be noted that it struggled to find its way into the canon of the Old Testament. Traditionally, its value is seen in the explanation of the Jewish festival of Purim and the celebration of God's saving grace through the actions of courageous Queen Esther, who was able to influence events even in the patriarchal system in which she found herself, her actions saving her nation at a critical time in their history. The central character of Esther is celebrated in the infamous words in chapter 4, verse 14, "Who knows if you have not come to your royal position for such a time as this?" These words spoken of many lives, over many lives, particularly those of women leaders, myself too. I have no doubt that you have heard many sermons on her. But I wonder how many of you ever have heard or preached a sermon on her predecessor, Queen Vashti, upon whose untimely demise the story of Esther is built. Without taking away from the sentiment of Esther or her actions, I believe that this lost or hidden text of Queen Vashti must be lifted up more profoundly, as it offers a powerful narrative within which we can frame our biblical response to gender-based violence and the dominant power structures today. The setting of the book of Esther is the ancient kingdom of Persia, historically located between the time of Ezra 6 and Ezra 7, after the temple of Jerusalem was reconstructed, but before Ezra came to the throne. It tells the story of the powerful Persian King Xerxes in 483, in the third year of his reign, when he was in his 30s. His incredible power is alluded to in the reference to the vastness of the kingdom, which is divided into 127 provinces under his command, with him ruling from the opulent city of Susa. In a manly show of his power and wealth, the king decides to throw a huge banquet for all his top officials and advisors from all the provinces, which lasted a full 180 days. It makes us wonder what was happening in government and who was paying the taxes to pay for this huge banquet. Some historians suggest that this was a rallying and strategizing tactic as he planned to invade Greece some years later. Yet the focus seems to be more on him boasting and strutting his power and majesty, summarized in verse 4. For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and splendor and the glory of his majesty. The opulent display of wealth is emphasized in the detailed description of the decor, the type of goblets used, and even the alcohol that flowed freely. And as if this was not enough, he then gives a further banquet for a week to all the people and nobles of that city in the confines of his garden, which some historians suggest could have housed over 1,000 people. This is the setting, the beginning of the Vashti story, when on the seventh day of this banquet, when the king, in high spirits from the wine, commands that his wife, Queen Vashti, be brought to the banqueting hall wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to his nobles and all the people gathered there. No doubt his intention is to display his greatest possession, for women were regarded as such in that culture, so that he could boast and remind them of the one thing that they would never possess. I must acknowledge that there has been some debate from scholars as to whether he expected her to be dressed in nothing more than her crown. But whatever it is, the setting would have been deplorable and degrading for her, as she was to be strutted amongst the drunken guests gathered after 7 days of feasting and drinking. However, this becomes the turning point of the story. For upon hearing the command of the king, Queen Vashti does the unthinkable. She refuses the command of her husband. Maybe I read a little too much in the simple act of refusal, but for me it stands out as the pivotal moment of the story, which up to then is dominated by the powerful figure of Xerxes. Scholars debate the reason for her refusal, since she is denied the privilege of stating her reason. But it seems obvious to me in my 20th century eyes that she holds on to her dignity, refusing to be shamed and objectified by her powerful husband, whose only interest is in the display of his power and status for all to see. But maybe her reasons ran deeper than that. What I do know is that a powerful no sets in motion her own demise, but sets the stage for the next woman who will take up the reins of refusal in a different way. Let's note the responses in this story and what we can learn from them. Number 1, the king is angry. The king's reaction is predictable. He is enraged beyond control. In verse 12, we read, the king became angry and burnt with fury. His fragile male ego takes a knock and he feels humiliated, knowing how he will become a mockery to others. Maybe this is the first time that he has been refused, especially by a woman. I want us to note that reaction, because this is a reaction that is displayed again and again when resistance is offered. When the fragile patriarchal ego is challenged, anger often follows, and it is accompanied by violence and other actions to assert power and authority. These may include threats, denial of food or money or other basic essentials, degrading words, and at worst, rape and murder. Survivors often testify this is why people are afraid to say no or to resist abuse. One woman said that when she stopped resisting, her partner was sometimes less violent, which she then learned to manage. But when her partner's anger was unleashed, she never knew if she would make it to the next day. The truth is, when anger is expressed in uncontrollable ways, women get hurt and women die. A challenge which we must take seriously if we are going to follow through on becoming safe spaces for women to tell their stories of resistance and refusal. Secondly, note that the king gets support. King Xerxes, in his anger and humiliation, seeks wisdom from his advisors. They support him and add fuel to the fire and lay blame solely on Vashti, without challenging the shameful action of the king himself. Verse 16, their response is, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only to the king, but against all the nobles and the people of the provinces of King Xerxes. Women will tell you that this is the typical reaction as survivors are further victimized and shamed. Horror stories abound of how rape survivors are treated at police stations, hospitals, and even their homes. Accusations are made. Why were you there? Why did you go looking for trouble? Why was your skirt so short? Why did you not cry out for help? Survivors in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where sexual violence has become a weapon of war, tell how they are abandoned by their families or their husbands who blame them for being raped by the soldiers, and the children born out of this rape are ostracized by the community and even denied education. Stigma remains one of the most painful scars that survivors carry, with those who have told their stories to harassment teams often blamed by their families and church members for bringing shame upon themselves and those they accuse. If we are to tackle the issue around gender-based violence, abuse and harassment, we must deal with the painful reality of stigma and blame. Thirdly, let us see the challenge to male patriarchal power. The key to understanding the real issue at hand is found in verses 17 to 18, in the response that is made. For the queen's conduct will be known to all women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. While stated as an accusation, these nobles recognize the power of Vashti's no. They recognize that this in itself can change their social order and the privilege which they have enjoyed for so long. Their fear is the loss of respect from their own wives. They recognize this one act of refusal can set off a rebellion too great for them to imagine. Maybe their own dominions of absolute power will be unearthed in this one act of defiance. So the decree that goes out is that every man shall rule over his household. Imagine for a moment that one act of refusal can unleash the change needed to stem the tide of our dominant system. This passage suggests to me that gender-based violence can be addressed if more people say no. From this passage, women are given a courageous example to say no. And imagine if men too can join in that powerful no. Imagine if the nobles refused to support King Xerxes on that day. One wonders if things could have turned out differently. King Xerxes failed in his response and remained entrenched in a dominant system of power and patriarchy. I want to say to you, men, you can say no to this system. Men can say no to toxic masculinity that is killing thousands of women across the world. Women can say no too, even to those who have been caught up in the same system that we have begun at times to believe for ourselves. We need to say a powerful no. I want us to notice one last thing. The cost of doing so is very high. The story does not end well for Vashti. She is deposed and banished. Some suggest that she may even have been killed, although this is never explicitly said in the text. The price for saying no is high. Women have been ostracized, further violated, and even died when they have said no. Men have been mocked when they have said no. At one level, it looks as though the men of the day won. There is a cattle call, and a new bride is sought to help the king forget his former wife. Esther is crowned queen, and Vashti's voice is silenced for the moment. Historically, unlike Esther, Vashti's courage is not praised or defended, even in traditional church history. As far as I know, this text never actually appears in our lectionary for the church year. Maybe, just maybe, because the church and the powers that be are scared by the reaction that it may spark. For if taken seriously, it means unearthing the dominant narrative of male pride and patriarchy, even within the sacred walls of the church, where woman's indignity, pain, and suffering has not been taken as seriously as it should have. This is part of our lament as the MCSA and our commitment to do better. It is true that Vashti did not change the world, but her powerful no set something in motion which people remembered, which Esther remembered, which the writers of the Bible remembered, and which we believe the king remembered. Sometimes we have to trust that that is enough. Vashti's courageous no sets the stage for Esther herself, who finds the courage later on to defy the same powerful king and his evil advisers in order to save her nation from extinction. I wonder whether Esther would have found the courage to do so if she had not had the example of Vashti, her predecessor, a woman who said no. As one commentator reflects, Esther finishes what Vashti started. Together, their story is a sacred memory of how a woman or any oppressed people can overturn a world by just saying no. It is a story of how we are so connected that one injustice can lead to another. One resistance can give rise to another. The struggle is not won in a day, but we dare not accept things as they are. Our willingness to embrace God's image and a new order will bear fruit, maybe only for those who follow us. This biblical passage offers us hope and the courage to say no. As disciples of Christ, we are called courageously to live in a kingdom way, which defies the dominant system of power in whatever form it may arise. So may we courageously do so, taking up the challenge given to young Timothy in a different context, yet relevant today. For God did not give you a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. Amen.